DNA has changed a lot of things. And so the old way of looking at plants was to look at characteristics of the plant group, what flowers look like, seed pods look like, and all that, to decide which ones were closely related. But now we have these DNA studies, which are much more definitive about what plant and how closely it's related to another plant. So DNA analysis resulted in some changes in the way these plants were organized. And so what happened was these plants that were related to tobacco all together, but the name Primulina was older, and so that name took precedence, so they all were changed into Primulina. And I have also put a little thing there. If you are a member of the Gesneriad Society, they have revised their Know and Grow booklet, and there's a lot of good information in there. So I will have to say I did steal a little bit from them. So let's look. I'm going to show you a picture of tobacco. Okay. And I should say a disclaimer about the photos. Most of the photos are my photos, but there are some that I had to steal from other sources because I couldn't find one. And tobacco is one of them. So one place that I use all the time is called the Gesneriad Reference Web, and it has pictures of the different genera. It's got the species and the hybrids separated, pictures of a lot of plants. So the tobacco picture here I found on the Gesneriad Reference. But that was the original Primulina. Now it is thought to be very closely related to all the other ones I'm going to show you. Now, the picture on the right, Metapetrocosmia tamiana, that was originally Charita. It's a very easy little plant to grow. It sets seed so well, easy to grow from seed. It's a lovely small plant. Well, it's had its name changed because of DNA. They decided it was not a primulina. Many of us thought that because there were characteristics of the plant that were so different from all the other ones. Although the flowers look a lot like Primulina flowers. But anyway, they put it in a genus Dinostigma. Remember that? Dinostigma tamiana? Well, then they changed it again. It's now Metapetrocosmia tamiana. It's still a great plant. Most of it should say tamiana, and you know what we're talking about. Yes, because who knows? This type of the science of classifying plants is always changing. And I personally think that the genus itself needs to be subdivided. I'll talk about that a little bit as we go on. But anyway, going forward, it is my favorite genus. And so I'm going to tell you why I love this genus. And for those of you who are new growers, you want to try to get your hands on it because they are easy. Number one reason I like it is because it can be exhibited at a show with or without flowers. That's because the foliage tends to be rather decorative. They tolerate a wide range of conditions. They are much less touchy than some of the other Gesneriads are. You don't have to grow them in particularly high humidity. They are more tolerant of temperature swings than other ones. The way I grow, on to the next thing, and I'll tell you about that. Some of mine are grown under natural light in a glass porch that goes down to 55 degrees east in the winter. And in the summer, it goes up well above 90, and they seem to thrive. So they slow down when it's cooler. You know, they may not put on a lot of growth, but they tolerate it. You would not be able to grow your African violets with those temperatures. They would not like the heat and they wouldn't like the cold. But Primulina is much more tolerant. They are perennial plants with fibrous roots, no tubers, no rhizomes to have to worry about. They don't go dormant. And most of them are not huge. They grow in 3 to 5 inch pots, some of them even in 2-inch pots. And they don't need any special lighting to grow. As I said, some of mine grow in natural light. Some of them will grow in artificial light. And I'll tell you more specifics as we get into how I grow. Now, a few pictures. And I'm going to start with some species first. Now, what do we mean by species? Well, a species is a plant that is growing in nature. Basically, if you cross it with another plant of the same species, it will come true from seed. The seedlings will look more or less like the parents. Now, not absolutely identical, as we know with families. Even identical twins can show some differences, and there will be slight. If you cross two different, for example, Sino-Vietnamica, if you cross the same plant but a different seedling, will have some variation. But basically, it's going to come out to be the same plant. And we'll talk about what we get if we're not crossing the same plant in a minute. Well, I put Sino-Vietnamica in there first because this is the rage right now. How many of you have been able to get a hold of one? Do you like it? I've
Yeah,
heard there are 17. Bill, you have one?
yeah, I do, but it's not very big.
Well, they don't get very big. It's not a large growing plant. And I have heard there are 17 different variations in leaf coloration. So I think this was a pretty one. This one was exhibited at the convention in St. Louis in July. I think this was Kathy Spisman's plant. I had one as well, but mine wasn't as nice as hers. I had a disaster in the hotel room. I'll try to remember to tell you about that. Another species I love, but look how different this is. Huangii. That species has these long, thin, very thin leaves. Sino-Vietnamica has very fleshy leaves. Huangii, when I first got that plant, I thought, oh, these leaves are going to be tough to root. You mean I'm going to be able to get a plant from it? Believe how fast those leaves root. And it has flowers on a long stem that are very tiny. So there's a lot of variation within this genus. And that's why I think it probably should be subdivided. Some more species. The one on the left, and that is my photo. That was my plant. I have used this plant frequently in hybridizing. I love it. It's a very small, dark-leaved plant. It tends to be a little bit touchy. It likes to grow in high humidity, especially to get the flowers to open. First time it was good for me, I'd come home from a trip and I had put domes over most of my trays. And there were all these flowers on it. I'd never seen one. I was shocked. So I like that plant a lot. The one on the right, Leprosa, that is not my photo. I have not been able to get that plant to bloom. So frustrating. And I've tried all different, tried it in natural light, tried it in artificial light, tried it with dome over it. I can get a nice looking plant, but I can't get those flowers. But I have managed to get a hybrid with it. I'll tell you how when we get to my hybrids. It's a beautiful plant. It has red hairs on the leaves. Anybody here growing Leprosa? Nobody. Okay. I'm trying to start some, and I'll tell you about some sales coming up, so maybe you'll be able to get one. I like it. A couple more species that are much easier to grow. I've been growing Dryas angustifolia for many years. Dryas is another one that has variations in it. And usually what they will say is they'll say Primulina Dryas. And some of them have a cultivar name, like you may have seen Hisako. So they will put Hisako in single quotes, but that is considered to be a variation on Dryas. Of Hisako? Good.
It's big.
Yes, it does. It can get big. Well, the interesting thing about that, I am not sure. There's one in that's classified as a Dryas variant, which is called Nain Argente. Any of you grown that one? Beautiful plant, isn't it? But I don't think it should be in there. Karen Shahaki and I think it's a hybrid, but they're still calling it a species as a variant of Dryas. Doesn't have any pollen on the flowers. So I'm having trouble thinking it is actually a species because the species it should have pollen, shouldn't it? Yes, yes.
This is it.
Lowercase. It should be, yes. And it's a beautiful variegated plant. And this one's young. But if you that means no, it shouldn't be a hybrid. it's a cultivar, but it's considered a variant of that species. So what I don't know, DNA would sort of tell you if you, but I don't know how many of these plants they've actually analyzed. They didn't ask me. Like I said, a couple of us that are Primulina growers, and you guys probably know Karen Shahaki, and she grows a lot of Primulinas, and we talk back and forth about this. And she says, I think this genus needs work. Now, this other one on the right side, this one, when I got it, and boy, I couldn't wait to get it. I got it in 2019. I bid on a bunch of leaves that Bill Price, who lives in the Vancouver area, put up for auction at the Gesneriad convention. He was calling it pseudo young Falensis. Now I'm just going to go right quickly to the next slide. That plant on the left was the original young Falensis. Fairly new species as far as what we know about it. So Bill had this one and was calling it pseudo young Falensis. So that's what I started calling it. I started reading the leaves and growing the plant, and I have some hybrids with it. Well, then one of the experts in China said they're the same plant. So I'm starting to call it young Falensis dark form because they haven't decided what we're supposed to call it. Bill is still calling it pseudo young Falensis. He had some leaves for sale at the last convention, and yet this guy in China is saying no. So there's some kind of disagreement. These experts are not all agree. Anyway, it's a beautiful plant. I have trouble getting it to be a pretty show plant, but it's gorgeous. It has red leaves. I think it looks nothing like the original, and I can't grow the original. I kill it. Okay, so hard to say. You would think that dark one would be harder, wouldn't you? But whatever. Somebody will decide one of these days. But at any rate, another one that I have hybridized is this fairly plain looking little plant, Medica. And I don't get it to flower very often, but it has a pinkish kind of flower. And you will see, yes, very delicate. The foliage is nothing to write home about, though. It's just kind of ordinary. But the whole idea is if you cross two species, you're going to get a hybrid, and you're going to get something that's rather different, probably for either parent. I say probably because depends on how closely related the two species are. But, who knows? So going back to that leprosa, right now, I don't know, can you see the little yellow tips on that flower? My friend Karen actually has some seedlings coming along that have leprosa in the background. They're just getting ready to bloom. So she's so excited. She hopes she sees some yellow. We don't know if you will or not. I don't want to spend too much time on that. A couple of other species. Planera calyx is one that is fairly common species. Interesting. I've used that for hybridization. That is a lovely little plant. I brought one with me today to show you one in person. And one of the newer ones is Maciejewski, which was named for Stephen Maciejewski, who's involved in Liberty Bell Gesneriad Society. He was president for many years, but finally this year got a new president. But anyway, he was in China when they found this new species. And I brought one today that has a few flowers on it for you to see. It's very easy to grow. The leaves on this one are very thin. It's more like the wangia that I showed you, not fleshy at all. So now let's look at some hybrids. No, well, these are two of my hybrids. So of course I put them first because I'm proud of them. Mini Pearl was my very, very first serendipitous hybrid, which has come out to be a very good plant. It has white flowers, and I'll show you the parents in a minute. Newer hybrid I have is Charlie. I brought one of those today for you to see in person. And these are not my hybrids, but there's some that I grow that I love. The one on the left, Schwann's Party Dress, came out of China, and it is gorgeous. It has very silvery leaves. This is my plant, and that is my photo, but I have never been able to get a head bloom like that again. when you grow these plants, you never know. One thing that I remember from a program I attended many years ago is that if you want to exhibit plants, you have to grow a lot of plants because you never know what's going to be ready at showtime. So anyway, Schwann's party dress is a great one. If you can get that Primulina, it's beautiful, not in bloom, and it's fabulous when it is in bloom. A very old one is Chastity, and it was named because at that time they thought Primulina hybrids were all sterile. Not true. We found that out later as the genus was expanded. Chastity is one of the few that gets huge. I grow it on a landing with a skylight over it, and it's easily 4 feet tall. And it blooms almost constantly, which is also different. Because many of the Primulina bloom when they darn well feel like it. So it's a good thing you can exhibit them without flowers. But Chastity is a great one. I'm not going to stop growing it. I love it. It's old, but sometimes the old ones are the good ones. Yes, I have 2 crowns on it right now. It doesn't readily produce offshoots, but when it does, I do let them grow. And it's great. It's also great as a single crown plant. I'm just thinking. Well, it kind of grows up on a kind of a woody stem. That's why it gets so tall. But the leaves are huge. You can't tell from this photo, really. But the leaves are huge, the flowers are huge. And like I said, it blooms all the time, which is wonderful, even in the winter. In natural light. Deco, that shows you a lot of great leaf patterning. That's a Peter Shallot hybrid. He early on introduced several exotic leaf patterns. And I still grow this with great plant. Now, I wanted to show you one of the yellow flower, and for the life of me, I could not find in my photographs a picture of Kitaguni. And I've grown the plant. I know I've taken pictures of it. So this is not a very good one. I found this one on the web. There is a species that has all yellow flowers. It's Primulina lutea. So Kitaguni is a hybrid with lutea. The first time I had lutea, I killed it. I don't know why. I think it needs a higher pH because it does grow on limestone cliffs. So it doesn't tolerate much acidity. So I have another one now, and if I can get it to bloom, I would like to work on hybridizing with that. There are some hybrids. Kitaguni's one. There's another one called Chiaki that has yellow flowers, and they are lovely plants. So sorry that photo's not too good. Here's 2 more seedlings. These are my pictures of my plants. This one, the one on the left with the big flowers, is a cross with Shuchengensis, that one I showed you with the blue flowers, and Medica. Now you'll notice the flowers turned out blue. It's a smaller plant, but it's a very durable plant. I'm not sure whether I'm going to name that one or not. I like to grow them out through 2 or 3 blooming cycles to see if they're really worth doing anything with. And the one on the right has variegated leaves or veined leaves. And it was marked that it was from the same cross as the one on the left. But the 2 parent plants do not have that veining in the leaves. So I really don't know where this one came from. The 2 parents were species, yes. And this one doesn't look like anything I've seen before. The flowers are held up. There's a lot of flowers per stem. The plant grows as a fairly nice symmetrical rosette. So I'm still evaluating that. I'm propagating it to see if it goes through propagation cycles, what it looks like. So, I'm getting kind of old to be taking a lot of time doing this, but I don't think you can completely evaluate a plant unless you grow it for a while. I don't like it when somebody makes a cross, they see something, they right away slap a name on it, put it out there, because it may not be a very good plant. So I've only formally named 2. I have a 3rd one right now that I brought to show you because I don't know if any of you bought any plants from Gary Hunter. Hunter Specialty Plants. Well, he has a lot of my hybrids, and he had one that his coworker, Carrie Cowell, really loved. And she bugged me to give it a name, and I will show you the plant, the physical plant, and tell you what I decided to name it. You can tell me if you think it's a good name or not. Because they wanted to put it out on the market. They are marketing Charlie, and he has many pearl, but I haven't seen him sell many of them. It's a little harder to propagate. Okay, let's go into how I grow. And this is where we're going to try to be as simple as possible. Soil mix. I use the same soil for everything because I grow mostly Gesneriad. My basic mix is 3 parts of basic potting mix, like Pronix mix. When I say like Pronix, I actually go to some of the Amish greenhouses who buy a commercial mix and then we sell it instead of buying a big compressed bale myself. And it's very similar to Pronix. I cut that with an equal amount of perlite, and I rinse the perlite before I put it in because perlite has a lot of dust on it. My newest thing I'm adding is part of Glee. Glee is a new potting mix that has something they're calling hydrofiber in it. And the problem with Glee is it has fertilizer mixed in, and you have to be so careful with your Gesneriad. So for propagation, I don't mix in anymore. And then I throw in a little bit of lime because most of the Gesneriads prefer not too much acidity, so you want to sweeten up the soil a little bit. Now, I would say when I say 3 parts with the 1 to 2 tablespoons of lime, that part is probably a quart. I have a plastic container that's about yay high that I believe holds about a quart. So we're saying 3 quarts of potting mix, 3 quarts of perlite, and 1 quart of Glee. And the Glee, when you buy it in the bag, it's all stuck together. It's compressed. It's a mess. You have to kind of rub it together, and I sieve it, put it through a grate kind of a thing to get it where it will mix in better. But that's my potting mix right there. Nothing else fancy added. For watering, I did install an RO system in my house because it was RO stands for reverse osmosis. Takes out everything. It takes out all the ions, all the minerals, all of the chlorine. You have nothing in there but water, a little bit of dissolved carbon dioxide because that's in the air. But I decided later I didn't need to use all RO water because our tap water at my home is pretty good. So I use half tap water and half RO water. I do let the tap water stand for at least 24 hours before I use it. I top water my plants. I don't wick water because I had a bad experience when I was just refilling wicks. It was a busy time of my life. I think one of my kids had moved back in with me with a baby. So it was kind of stressful time. And I got cyclamen lights and had to throw away a lot of my collection. So I top water because I constantly am looking at my plants. Every other watering I fertilize, I use Jack's 20-20-20, the basic mix. It does have the micronutrients in it, 1/4 teaspoon. And I mix that up in a gallon water jug, or a milk jug that I've saved. Growers save everything. We are not big polluters. Where do I grow? Well, I have several areas in my home that I grow, and it sort of depends on the season. I have a partially shaded deck, and many of my Gesneriads go outside in the summer, not the Primulias. They are a rather low light plant, but I grow some things like a Cheminese that can take more sun. I have a glassed-in sunroom that I grow plants year-round. It has some heating, but it gets pretty chilly near the windows. I have a basement that is quite chilly. This summer, it never got over 71 in the basement. It goes down to about 59 in the winter. So the things that I grow down there have to be pretty tolerant, and many of them I cover with domes. So I shuffle things around. Takes a lot of time to grow these plants, I'll tell you. I have two plant stands in the house. One is in our family room and one is in our bedroom that have a mixture of fluorescent and LED fixtures. And in most of these areas during the wintertime, I run humidifiers. Now, that has been a real bonus with the ROs because if you put tap water in a humidifier, somebody's nodding his head, you know what happens? You get a white dust all over everything. That's from the dissolved minerals. Well, the RO water, those have been taken out. So they are great to use in the humidifier because that mist that comes out, it won't leave this dusty residue all over the place. So that has been a real bonus of having the RO system. Well, that's where I grow. Now, of course, plants need light. And we have a couple of choices for artificial lighting for our plants, or of course, natural light. And I grow using all of them. So Primulina in particular, many of them grow in natural light out in that glassed in sunroom. And they do quite nicely. But I grow several of them under artificial light. They are considered to be a low light plant. So generally, I do not grow them under LEDs. I grow them under either fluorescents, the old fluorescents, T8s or T12. Looking at these, and these are T8s right in the room. T12s are the really old ones, the big tubes. That number refers to the diameter of the, or probably the circumference of the tube. So I have old T12 fixtures and I have some T8 fixtures. That's where most of the Primulinas grow. Then I have mixed in some LED fixtures. And Gesneriads in general grow well under all of these. The ones that need a little bit higher light, I will grow under LEDs. And most of my, they're all on timers. And the timers are set for 10 to 12 hours. If I go away, and I'm not wanting the plants to put on much growth and use up a lot of water, I'll cut the lighting back maybe to 8 hours. So that's lighting. What's next? Now let's talk a little bit about propagation. I don't think you can grow these plants without getting into propagation because you always want more. And I wanted to put in, I put a slide, I think I did put a slide about suggested propagation mix. I use the same method pretty much of propagating for everything. And that is I use moist potting soil, only slightly moist, and I use potting soil without any clay in it because I don't want that fertilizer. So you can propagate with seeds, with cuttings, leaves, rhizomes, tubers, all kinds of things, Gesneriad. You can take the rhizomes apart and propagate the scales. So propagating, though, there is one big key. Keep the humidity up. The tray that the things you're propagating in should be covered with a dome, or you can do like I do and save deli containers that are clear plastic and do your propagating in those. And like I said, growers save everything. I do have a one. Shoot, I didn't put that slide in. I thought I did. I wanted to tell you that a very good mix for propagating is Jiffy seed starting mix. It has no fertilizer in it. It's basically just very fine peat moss with a little bit of vermiculite. Mix that with equal parts of perlite, stir it up and moisten it, and that makes a great propagating mix because it has no fertilizer. It's widely available. It comes in a yellow bag, and I can recommend it. I've used it for years. Always keep it on hand. Is a great mix for propagating. Okay, so equal parts Jiffy mix, perlite. Now let's talk a little bit about hybridizing. It is challenging to hybridize Primulina because some of the flowers produce very little pollen, some produce quite a bit, and it's just tricky. And the hybrids were thought to be sterile. Now, in African violets, for example, there's thousands of hybrids. And one of the reasons for that is that there's a limited number of species. Mutations occur, and some of those can be used, but the hybrids themselves, for the most part, are fertile. So you can cross hybrids. You can back cross a hybrid with a species. So you have a lot more opportunity. With Primulina, if the cross is sterile, then you stopped right there. You're not going to be able to hybridize any. However, hybrids of Primulina, now that we have a lot more species to use, we found that some of the hybrids are turning out to be fertile themselves. So I now have some going that are actually hybrids of hybrids. Mini Pearl was my first hybrid. And this was my pollen parent and the only reason I picked it as pollen parent because it was in bloom. I had two in bloom. And I thought, oh, what the heck, I'm going to try these. And I was just so lucky. The very first cross I tried took because I've had many more that haven't. Anyway, this was the pollen parent, Lunarifolia. The flowers are very pale pinkish white. And it very much is a branching, almost trailing plant with fleshy leaves. So I had that one blooming, and this was back in 2018. Also had this interesting species, Ophiopomoides. That species, and this is not my photograph right here, the Lunarifolia was. This is not my photograph. I've never been able to get this plant to grow that well. It's a very slow growing plant. It produces these branches, but it takes forever. And I had the plant for 5 years. This is a screen that's bigger than the other side. I had the plant for 5 years before I ever got a flower on it. So when I got a flower, I thought, man, I would like to try hybridizing. So I crossed it with Lunarifolia, and you'll notice they are very similar looking plants. Now, the flowers on Ophiopomoides are solid white. They're pretty sparse. It blooms rarely. And it has one kind of undesirable feature, and that is that the leaves get this white crusting on them. I have entered this plant in garden book flower shows, and they have told me that I made a horrible mistake that I probably had some disease on the plant because they don't know the plant, even though I tried to explain to them this was a natural response. But at any rate, it has that, and it's not, it's not great, but it has. So anyway, I pollinated 2 flowers of the plant that's shown on the screen now with the plant from the previous screen. And I just wanted to show you what you're doing when you're crossing it. The stigma, the blue thing right in the middle, is the female part of the flower. And you have to get pollen on that stigma in order to get seeds forming down there in the ovary of the flower. And the anthers contain the pollen. And it's interesting on Gesneriad flowers, the anthers are connected to the part of the flower, the petal part. So you can cut off the petal part and get those anthers and get the pollen. And one of the nice things about crossing Primulina is rarely do you have a species spontaneously set seed. They don't readily pollinate. In fact, that Lunarifolia, I've never been able to get seed set on that. Sometimes I think you have to have 2 different clones. In other words, 2 different seedlings of the plant in order to set seed on. So that's not a huge problem. It's a problem when you're hybridizing the ninja because they do sell quite easily. So that's what we're going to be doing is we're going to be putting pollen on the stigma from using the anthers or pollen from another plant. And as I told you, I dissected a few flowers. I cut open the flowers to get the pollen, transferred the pollen with a toothpick, labeled it, sat back to see what would happen. Well, believe it or not, it was apparent very quickly that I had a seed pod. So you see that long brown thing, and there were a lot of seeds in there. There were two of them. It takes about 45 days, more or less. It depends on the particular species you're using for the seed pod to mature. And when it matures, it splits, and you have to be careful. So I set my plant on a white plate so that I wouldn't use the seed because they are tiny. And I got lots of seeds, as you can see. Started them. It is a slow process. There's basically what happened when the cross was made, when I harvested the seed. I planted the seed right away. Fresh seed germinates, I think, the best. Excuse me. And I started it in a deli container. Now, this time I started on pure vermiculite. I don't do that anymore, but at the time I did. And I just sprinkled the seed on top of the vermiculite, put the lid on it, put it under the lights, and watched it. Excuse me. Is that true? No. I got a lot of seedlings, and they were incredibly tiny. When they first germinate, you just like a whole speck of green, and then they grow, and you have to start dividing them. And again, I use deli containers, and I start separating the seeds so you can see what they look like. And this is an operation that requires tweezers, magnifying glass, very strong light to get these little seedlings separated. And it's kind of frustrating because you can't save them all. There's so many, although we have woodcrafts, I only got 3 seedlings. So anyway, I'm going to go through this rather quickly, but it'll show you the progression of the seeds. I started potting them up. They look pretty much all alike at this point. One of the things that surprised me was that the seedlings were very fragile. Those leaves broke off so easily, and I thought, oh, bummer. I'm worried about this plant. Is it going to be a bad plant? Because these seem to be so fragile. I'm going to go quickly because you don't see much difference here. But by December, I was starting to see a little branching taking place. So the whole year after the cross, I still don't have any flowers. Okay, but I'm starting to get some plants that look nice. The leaves are very dark green. Some of them are starting to branch, and it's looking decent. But like I said, no flowers yet. So what I did, well, there's what the flowers started to look like. They were white. Some of the outer part of the flower has a slight pink tinge, but for the most part, they're pure white. It looks a lot like the 2 parents. It does not have the white crusting. Thank goodness. The leaves are very shiny and dark green, and it puts out those offshoots fairly readily. And that's the best way to propagate it. Unfortunately, these long, skinny, fleshy leaves, like mini pearl and like Linearphilia and like Ophiobloides, are slow to root and slow to produce babies. So the best way to propagate these plants and have the branches is to take a little branch because they root rather quickly. So what I did, I kept about 10 seedlings myself, but I shared others with members of my club, Delaware African Wildlife Society. And when I went to the Gesneriad convention in July of 2019, which is a little more than a year after I had made this cross, I donated the plant to the auction. Now, I hadn't registered it or given it a name, but anyway, somebody bought it. They were interested. And then in October that year, the Delaware Club had a Gesneriad show. And I picked one of my seedlings and entered it in my flowering class. And it actually got 97 points and a ribbon for being the best not in flower Gesneriad. And at that show, we had a plant sale, and Mary Schaefer and I had I had given her several seedlings. We sold a bunch of them. And lo and behold, I'll tell you, I guess the next slide will tell you. The selected seedling I thought was a good one, so I did register it, and I named it Mini Pearl. I picked that name just because a friend of mine had named her car Mini Pearl. I thought it was kind of cute. It had white flowers, so I decided to name it Minnie Pearl. And then of course we had COVID. Uh anyway, this is in 2022, and the plant obviously has a lot more flowers per branch now. That's why I say you can't truly evaluate a seedling just even at the end of 1 year. It takes some time to see if there's going to be much value in it. And I thought I'm looking for, okay, I must have accidentally deleted that slide when I wanted to put in the one. I was going to put one in about the Jiffy Mix last time. I guess I messed up and deleted one. That there was a plant of many before I registered it that was entered. I think it was in the Mid Atlantic show 1 year, but I think Mint Dewey might have entered it because he probably bought a seedling at our sale, and he had a nice plant. So I was trying to get more people to grow it and see what would happen to it. So there's a mature plant. There's a couple more views of it. I lost the slide. Crunch. Somehow it's probably on my computer and didn't get saved to this version because I put a new one in last time. Okay, so I'll tell you. It was a picture of me with the plant that I didn't grow. I gave a plant to a young fellow named Josh Higgins, who lives in the St. Louis area. And he had gone to the Gesneriad convention that took place in Tacoma, I think. And I gave him either a leaf or a small plant of many colors. And he grew it, and he grew this plant in a greenhouse and entered it in the Gesneriad convention this past July, which was St. Louis. And the plant got best, what did it get? Best? I don't remember. Anyway, they gave it a ribbon for the best new introduction in the past 5 years. And his plant was gorgeous. It had hundreds of flowers on it. In his greenhouse, he gets it to bloom 3 times a year, said. It looked wonderful. So I had a picture of Josh and me with the plant, which I had put in the program. Oh, okay. That's Josh, though.
Yeah.
No, that's not a picture of me.
Oh.
But you can look at the picture. There's the plant. But I had a picture of me with Josh, and I put it in the program. But like I said, when I saved it, this I'm running off the program I had on my hard drive. So it was huge. It was gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous. Now we're to the end. Okay, so there we've got that Vietnamica again. Sino Vietnam. That plant I've been trying to set seed on, and so far haven't had any luck. But there are a few people that have managed to get seed on this. I've also tried to use the pollen. I'm not having too much luck with that, but I'll keep persisting. Eventually it's going to happen.